Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be my version of what is my favorite video to watch on everybody else's channel, which is the annual statistics video. I took a little time doing this because my sister and her family were visiting. They came in on New Year's and stayed for a week, and she also likes statistics and kept asking me when I was going to pull them, and I said I didn't have time because she was visiting. But she has gone home, so now we're going to do the stats. According to Goodreads, I tracked 131 items last year. It was slightly less than that on Storygraph because Storygraph has slightly fewer items, and even when you try to import them, I've had issues with the app crashing when I try to import things about 30% of the time, so that's why there's a slight discrepancy. Also, according to Goodreads, the longest book that I read last year was James Baldwin's The Price of the Ticket, which comes in at 704 pages, and is a collection of some of his popular nonfiction writing, essays that are collected in a number of smaller things, but still worth picking up if you're looking for an overview of how his writing evolved over time. And the shortest book that I read was a picture book called The City Speaks, which I haven't talked about because I neglected to take a video of it before I took it back to the library. It's a visually interesting Canadian children's book in which a young girl who's blind and her father walk through a city. And the illustrations look like they should be textured. The pages aren't textured, which seems like a missed opportunity, but it's a cute kid's book. In terms of popular and least popular, the least shelved book that I read last year, which has only been tracked on Goodreads by 10 other people, was Paul David Power's Crippled. He is a playwright from Newfoundland, and this is a play script. The scripts are never that popular to track, but especially the Canadian ones, I think. And the most shelved was Elie Wiesel's Night, which a couple of million people have also tracked. So that makes sense. I feel like that is something that everyone has read. And so with that done, I'm going to flip over to Storygraph. I'm not going to post the moods thing because I do not see the point of that. That and pace, those feel pretty meaningless to me. In terms of page count, 80% of the books that I read were under 300 pages, which is interesting because I did feel like this was a year in which I read fewer collections of poetry and far fewer graphic novels than usual. And normally those are the things that keep the page count down, so that was interesting. Although I do know that this was a year with a lot of novellas and a fair number of nonfiction works that were essentially testimonies, which don't tend to be super long. So that was interesting. Oh, also the dogs, I read a number of dog training and dog behavior type material, and a lot of that is quite short as well. My fiction-nonfiction ratio was very close to 50-50. The nonfiction came out to slightly on top, as usual, but not by much. It was 53% nonfiction and 47% fiction. I didn't pull my own genre list this year. Maybe I should have because I don't always love the list of genres that Storygraph uses. But on Storygraph, my number one was history, number 2 was memoir, number 3 was poetry, which surprises me because I feel like it's not been a year of a lot of poetry, but there we go. Short stories, which again, that does not seem like a genre to me. Then literary, mystery, that's always thanks to March Mystery Madness. Essays, biography, classics, politics, crime. Anyway, I'm not going to read the whole list, but I should start pulling that again for myself because I don't love that list. Format as tracked on Storygraph, and again, I think this is imperfect because there were a few things where I couldn't find the actual edition that I had, but it gives my format as overwhelmingly print, which I'm sure is true, with 82%, and then 10% digital and 10% like a lot of my walking lately has been in places where I need to pay attention, so I just don't listen to audiobooks and very many other situations. So next up, most read authors. My most read author is 100% of the time Agatha Christie. When is it ever anybody else? Maybe that year a few years ago when I read a bunch of Brian McClellan's fantasy series all at once, but you know it's always Agatha Christie. And then the other authors from whom I read 2 books were Scholastique Mukasonga. I read her short story collection Igufu and then her satire Kibogo later in the year. The other authors from whom I read 2 books were both the dog training books that I talked about. 2 were from Susan Garrett, who is an agility trainer who's trained a lot of champions over the past 30 years, who is actually in Southern Ontario here. She's out by Hamilton. And another 2 were by Turgid Rugas, who is a Norwegian behaviorist who has written a lot of texts on deciphering canine communication. At a certain degree, I guess, kind of at the forefront, or was at the forefront of a lot of the stuff that goes behind the force-free methods that people talk about now. So I read stuff from the two of them. I actually feel like I read 3 things from Turgut Rugas, but this only tracked 2. So maybe I forgot to enter one of them in here. Languages is kind of embarrassing because I had a big goal to make sure that I read 2 French books every month, and I completely failed at that. So my language breakdown was 93% English, 4% French, and then 1% each for German and Turkish. And it gives me 1% for Spanish, but I would be hesitant to count that. That was an audiobook that I listened to because I was taking a Spanish course over the summer, and part of our homework was to consume content, so I put on a collection of Pablo Neruda's poetry, and I would not say that I really read that because I was listening to it, but my fluency level is not high enough to actually say that I understood what I was hearing at any number of books of pages chart is actually kind of interesting because I had a huge drop-off in October. I think I only read 2 books in the entire month. And what was funny is I wasn't really doing anything else because actually this year has been kind of slow. 131 is a decent number, so I don't want to be one of those people who said, oh no, I only read that many, because that's certainly more than most people read. But normally I read around 200 books a year, and I don't know why I didn't read more this year, because I certainly wasn't doing anything else. I think I watched 1 complete movie all year. I think the only TV series I watched was Great British Bake Off and the Canadian Baking Show. Like, genuinely, I watched no TV, no films. Almost every game that I tried to get into I didn't finish. The Wastelands 2 was one. Days Gone was bad. I did finish The Outer Worlds, but that wasn't even that long. And I finished another playthrough of Mass Effect 3 because I play that every year, but that doesn't count. Well, this War of Mine, that was quite good. Nice and depressing. Anyway, you don't care about these video games. What I'm saying is I don't know why I didn't read more this year, because it wasn't like I was taking in other forms of media, so that's odd. Anyway, average ratings. I did not rate very many books 5 stars this year, so when I do my best of list, I don't know what I'm going to do, because actually some of the things that I rated 5 stars, a couple of them were things that I appreciated but didn't necessarily even enjoy, so I don't know if they'll go on a favorites list. We'll see. But yeah, it looks like my biggest bulk was around 3.75. So I read a lot of things that I think were decent, were reasonably satisfying, especially in terms of some of the nonfiction and some of the older fiction that I was reading, in which for some of the older fiction I was more interested in having the context. Like I read a number of quote-unquote modern classics from countries from which I haven't read any of their 20th century classics type things. So a lot of those were books that were interesting more for the context than for how much I enjoyed them. And similarly, some of the nonfiction that I read this year, again, for example, the testimonial type stuff, is the kind of thing where I appreciate having the knowledge gained, but the writing isn't necessarily the top quality, or the artistic quality isn't necessarily there, because that's not what the goal of that kind of thing is. So for the rest of the stats, I did something different from what I usually do, and I pulled my list from Goodreads, extracted the file, threw it into a spreadsheet, and tried to pull the charts automatically, which I don't love because the default setting doesn't actually give you the amount for a lot of the smaller categories. So next year I will do that differently, but here we go. The source of the books. 58% of the books that I read in 2022 were from the library, which, yes, is the majority, but prior to, I guess, 2021, that always would have been closer to 80%. So since 2020, I have bought a lot more books, which I think is why I'm reading more owned books. I always feel slightly sad that it's so low, but again, it is the majority of the books, so I shouldn't be complaining too much about that. 39% of the books that I read were owned. 2.2% were from NetGalley. I didn't quite get caught up with the advanced copies in there, but close enough. And then just under 1% were ones that I had borrowed. Country breakdown was quite good. No country was more than 1/3. My biggest percentage was the United States, with just under 1/3, around 30% even, which is a little higher than I would like. I would like that to be around 25%, just because I think it's so easy when you are reading books primarily in English, 93% in English. It's just very easy to end up picking up too many American titles. So 1/3, just under 1/3 is not bad, but I'd prefer to keep it under 1/4. I don't know how that's going to go because part of why I think that was bumped up is because I was reading for the BookTube Prize, and I did have the translated group in the middle, which was all non-US books. For the first and the final round, I was judging nonfiction, and this coming year, they've done away with translated fiction, which is a shame. Because the one thing that I was kind of unhappy with is not that the books were bad, but just I don't love that this is what we're picking. We're picking everything that's very, not just that they're by US authors, but it's very US focused and focused on specifically US history. But anyway, there was around 10% for the UK and a little under 10% for Canada. But the rest is a decent spread of other countries and the rest of the world. So I was not unhappy with that. In terms of the original language that the books were published in, 57% of the books that I read were originally published in English, which again is a little higher than I would like. I would like it to be closer to a 50-50 split, but 43% other languages is still close enough to what my goal was that I'm not going to complain too much. And again, this is a shame about the way the charts pull. They only show me things that have higher percentages where there were at least a minimum of 2 books, so all the one-offs aren't included in the first chart that I could pull. The thing that I was pleased about it for that is that the French percentage was only around 11%, because I think often the percentage of things that I read that aren't in English, it's fully half of that is French. So that is not the case here, so that was good. For the cases of languages that are spoken broadly, so languages like English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, Russian, etc., it might be interesting to break that down by country and see if I'm reading too many from a single country. I think with that, sometimes it's easy to think you're doing a better job than you are. So my split for Portuguese was an exact 50-50 split of Brazil and Portugal, which suggests to me that I need to pick up some books from Mozambique or Angola at the very least. My Spanish split was not 90% Argentina this year, so that's a victory. My split of the Balkan language was 40% Bosnia and then 20% each for Serbia, Montenegro, and Croatia. My Arabic split was 50% for Egypt and then 25% each for Syria and Palestine. All right, so for English, my breakdown was 54.3% US, 16% Canada, 18.5% UK, 2.5% India, and then just over 1% from South Africa, Malawi, Australia, Kenya, Palestine, Croatia, and China. So with authors from Canada, the US, and the UK, if someone immigrated before the age of 13, I classified them as being from US, Canada, UK, just because I think, again, it is too easy to put people into a category of, well, they were born in this country and in one country but moved to the other at the age of 2. And so if their cultural sphere and all of their education was in one of these other countries, I think that's the one that it makes the most sense to plunk people into, especially if you're considering publishing, because they're being published as a local writer and not as an international writer. And that's an access issue that I think it's worth considering. And for French, 46.7% were from France, 13% were from Morocco, 13% were from Rwanda, and then 6% each from Belgium and Senegal, and another 6% where nationality is too difficult to determine. I'm surprised that I didn't have any like that for English this year, just because sometimes you get people who have been refugees or in exile and don't consider themselves to be of whatever their birth country was because of changing borders or because of whatever genocide may have happened at whatever point. And French is not the last one. Russian. My Russian breakdown was a split of Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. Although, and this is where tracking can get tricky, my least favorite book that I read for the BookTube Prize was George Saunders' A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which includes his own commentary, but also a number of short stories from a variety of Russian writers. So I did not track that as individual short stories that I was reading in translation, although I suppose technically I could have. So, in which case, Russian would be the overwhelming one of things I read in Russian that had been translated from Russian, but I didn't track it that way. And since that was demographics, we might as well jump into gender. 51.9% of the authors that I read were male, 42.6% were female, 3% were either non-binary or something else outside of male and female, and only just over 2% were books with multiple authors. And again, I think that's because I read fewer graphic novels this year, but I didn't pull the number, so I don't have that. I should have before I did this. As ever, though, we need to end with the most important statistic that I pull every year, and that is the Agatha Christie stat. So, of the British authors that I read this past year, 46.7% were not Agatha Christie, which means that the majority, at 53.3%, were. And if you're keeping track, that also means that on a global scale, while 93.9% of the authors that I read were not Agatha Christie, 6.1% were. And on that note, those are my statistics for this past year, 2022. I did pull fewer things because I tried to do this in a way that I thought was going to be easier. I don't think it was actually easier. Next time I will use my own spreadsheet and not try to pull Goodreads' numbers into Google Docs, because that was clearly the wrong choice. Anyway, if you've made a stats video and I haven't commented on it, let me know, because I love these and I want to watch it. And if you think I should track something else next year, let me know, and I will add that to my list of things to look into. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.